Hello everyone. For this week's tutorial, I would like to talk about color palettes and how to select colors for your 2D projects. You may recall that for last week, I talked about how to select colors for the outlines of your basic shapes. However, for this week, I would like to talk more in depth about how to select your colors with accuracy and precision. Currently, I am on the menu for editing custom colors and selecting custom colors once you click Edit Colors in Microsoft Paint. You may notice in Microsoft Paint when you edit colors, there are two columns beneath the color picker. I would like to talk about the first column first because it is the easiest to understand how colors work with it. Hue determines the actual tone of the color from 0 to 240 degrees in 15 color steps. The closer it is to a step, the more it will take it on. For example, a hue of degree 5 will be mostly red with a slight orange tint, while a hue of degree 25 will be mostly yellow with a slight orange tint. This is because orange is degree 15, red is degree 0, and yellow is degree 30. Saturation works as 0 to 250 instead of 0 to 240 and refers to the intensity or saturation of the color. Luminosity refers to the brightness of the color and also works on a scale of 0 to 240. Note that saturation and luminosity also take on the value it is greater to. For example, a saturation of 235 would be very pronounced, whereas a saturation of 5 would be very grayish. Similarly, a luminosity of 5 would be very dark, while a luminosity of 235 would be very bright. The second column, red, green, and blue, determines the color by adding a mixture of red, green, and blue on a scale of 0 to 255 for each individual color. For example, a color of value red 125 and green 125 would be yellow of 125 because it is a mixture of red and green. If you have a greater amount of one of the components, it'll emphasize it more. So if the red is greater than the green, it'll have a more reddish tint for an orangey look. And if you have more green, it'll have a more greenish tint. This means that if you have all red, green, and blue components in equal amount, it will become gray because that is the real world result of adding all the colors in an equal amount if they are not fully bright. Therefore, we can also determine that white would be 255 red, 255 green, and 255 blue because it is all the colors in their full brightness and intensity, and similarly, black is 0 of them all for the opposite reason. Notice that next to the two columns in Microsoft Paint, you are allowed to add 16 custom colors before having to replace one of the slots. However, if you use Photoshop instead, you will have to replace the color every time you select a new one. There won't be any slots to save them in. A benefit that Photoshop does have that Microsoft Paint does not, however, is the ability to specify a color using a hexadecimal value, which means that you can use only one value instead of 3 separate ones to determine the red, green, and blue concentrations. The hexadecimal value works by letting you type in 2 digits for the red, 2 digits for the green, and 2 digits for the blue, respectively. Hexadecimal values also work slightly different than the regular values, formerly known as decimal values. How hexadecimal values work is that instead of only being 0 through 9, it is 0 through F, with A being 10, B being 11, C being 12, D being 13, E being 14, and F being 15. This means that each digit now has 16 possible values instead of only 10. This is useful because whereas Red 255 might be 255 in decimal values. In hexadecimal values, it would be FF, because it is 15 times 16 plus 15, which would be 255. This means that if you wanted a color of value red 255 and green 255, instead of typing in red 255 and green 255 separately, you can do FF, FF00, and one value and you'll get the same result. One final color feature that Photoshop has that Microsoft Paint does not is gradients. We will talk more in depth about how to customize them in the next tutorial, but for now, simply pick any of the predefined gradients once you click on the gradient tool. For those who are curious, a gradient is essentially a smooth transition from one color to the next within an area. Now that we have gone over how defining colors works, we can discuss the eyedropper tool and the paint bucket tool. The eyedropper tool allows you to select a single pixel, and that pixel's color value will be the new color value. This is useful if you want to reference colors in an existing image in order to match colors exactly or similar to that image. The other color-based tool is the paint bucket. It works by filling in the area bound by lines. Note that the area must be fully enclosed. If it is not, the paint bucket will leak into the surrounding area and only will stop when it meets an area that is enclosed. Paint bucket not enclosed. Paint bucket not enclosed. Paint bucket that is enclosed. Note that on Photoshop, you can fill in either solid colors or gradients, but on Microsoft Paint, you can only fill in solid colors. The paint bucket on Microsoft Paint is pretty obvious to find. With the paint bucket in Photoshop, you have to right-click the gradient tool and it will provide a drop-down menu with the gradient and paint bucket options. The paint bucket will not be right there for you like on Microsoft Paint. One final thing to note is that Photoshop offers CMYK colors, but those are often only used for printing, which we will not do with designing video games, so we will ignore those for now. This tutorial will be the last one we use Microsoft Paint in. While it is a good tool to show beginners concepts, other tools, like Photoshop, are much more advanced and have more versatile tools. I encourage you to customize colors in either program you are comfortable with, and use a wide variety of colors to catch the viewer's eye. Join me next week and learn about opacity Join me next week and learn more in depth about how gradients work and what opacity is and how to use it.